Hello, everybody. Welcome to Community Conversations. My name is Courtney Shaw. I'm the facilitator of the series. I'm very, very pleased to welcome back Chris Tower today to give a talk that was going to be part of our literature series, but due to illness, got postponed, but we're so glad to have him back here. And I want to have a couple of announcements. We have a cart of banned books from the LCC library in the back, so you can check out books here if you'd like to. We also have some flyers for the series, so you can find those in the back as well, or come to me and I can get you one. And next week we have Jeff Ritchie. He's going to talk about the culture of gun violence. So please join us again next week. Today, I want to welcome Chris Tower. Chris Tower and his family moved from Michigan to Woodland, weary of the polar vortex in 2016, buying a house only seen via a video conference, making a bold move there. In addition to teaching at two online-only schools, Chris started teaching English composition here at LCC in the fall of 2018. He attended a small private school in Kalamazoo, Michigan, before he earned a master's in literature and a master's of fine arts in creative writing at Western Michigan University. Please welcome Chris Tower.
Thank you very much for attending. So, contrary to popular belief, my banned books talk was not banned. My wife got COVID. I felt really poorly and was out of work for 2 or 3 days, and thought I might be getting COVID, testing twice a day. Didn't get COVID. As far as I know, I have not had COVID. But Courtney was like, you could postpone, and I don't like to do that. So my first reaction was, no, I'll just stay up all night or something. But after thinking about it for 24 hours, I was like, no, I will postpone. So thank you for coming back. So everybody gets a bookmark today that lists banned books. So Courtney is going to distribute those for me. Also, if now or later you want to check out the talk, all the images that I used, several of the sources in PDF form, and a lot of images I didn't use, they're all at this bit.ly, bit.ly/3, and all lowercase letters except the X, so ZXNYGS. I don't pay for Bitly, so I can make a cool custom Bitly, so apologies for that. Courtney's original theme last quarter was guilty pleasures, and I'm not the first presenter to mention that reading for me is not guilty, and I read lots of things, as I'm going to describe in a few minutes, and I don't have guilt about any of it. It's all pleasure. With that, here's how I start. So I didn't know what censorship was as a kid, obviously. And I'm going to date myself here, but back when the Jesus Christ Superstar movie came out, there was a rumor going around in school, and I was a young kid at the time, that in the song Jesus Christ Superstar, they were singing, Jesus Christ Superstar, who the hell do you think you are? And so my parents, we couldn't spring for the double album of the Broadway version of the musical, but they had put out a compact hits version because some of the songs had reached the top 40. And so my friend and I were listening on the turntable. We didn't have headphones, right? Because headphones weren't really a thing then. And so we were listening, and they we thought we could hear it. We weren't sure because a bunch of people singing. Later, I found out that and it was years later, I found out that they were singing Jesus Christ Superstar, are you who they think you are? But, there was like, oh, ban that, can't have that. Then, of course, there's parental censorship. So when Shaft was a thing, I really was into Shaft. And I couldn't read it, I couldn't watch it. I eventually did get the album as a present in Christmas or birthday or whatever, but my father literally bought a copy of the book and read it to see if it would be okay for me to read, because it was full of lots of sex and obscenity and violence. And they were actually more concerned about the violence because later, a few years later, when Jaws came out, shark mania hit the country, and I desperately wanted to see Jaws. And after putting in a day of working with my father around the yard in the house, he revealed to me we were going to Jaws. So yes, going to Jaws, like I'm in junior high at this time. And then maybe 4 years later, when we go to Florida, I could only go into the ocean up to about here because I was still so terrified about sharks, which is why my parents were concerned about me seeing them. So censorship is often invisible. Censorship is often, we don't even know what happens because we don't know the things exist that we can't find, especially before the internet. And there's a term for this concept, in a sense, that I had to actually save on my blog, which I'll be mentioning that I have this blog, because I could never remember the name of this thing. And it's called Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. And it's this idea that until it's on your radar, you don't see it, but it's everywhere. And then once it's on your radar and you know it, now you start to see it. Now you start to notice all the whatever the it is, right? And I thought that was somewhat relevant. So then a few years later, I became a Dungeons and Dragons role player. Like literally my friend came over with a pocket full of dice, a map he had drawn, and a vague idea of the rules. No books. This was these books didn't exist yet, actually. But Dungeons and Dragons has been the target of censorship multiple times. Once a surge after the Columbine shooting in Colorado, as well as heavy metal and other things that those kids were into. There was one of many satanic panics around Dungeons and Dragons. And then there's what they did to comic books in the 50s. And some of these slides are just fast, and this is what's next, right? So comic books were under fire in the 50s because a guy named Frederick Wertham wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, in which he he was a psychologist, or maybe a psychiatrist, to prove that comic books cause juvenile delinquency, which was a huge hysteria at the time, right? And there's a great book about this, if you're interested, called The 10-Cent Plague by David Haju, which goes through all this stuff. And this hysteria, which was around the same time as the McCarthy hearings, drove many comic book publishers out of business. And comic books were huge post-World War II. They started in World War II being huge. And then in the 50s, horror comics and crime comics were big business, millions and millions of copies. And it drove EC Comics to publish this is one of the most incendiary examples of a killer with holding the beheaded head of his victim for a reason why young kids and teens shouldn't get to see these things. And the comic companies accepted their own censoring organization called the Comic Code Authority, and every comic had to receive approval by the Comic Code Authority or it couldn't be published. It wasn't until the early 70s that both Marvel and DC flouted the Comic Code Authority and published the first comics in decades without the seal. Marvel was first in their drug issue in Amazing Spider-Man, and then DC followed with their drug issue in the Green Lantern Green Arrow comic, in which the young protege of Green Arrow, Speedy, this unfortunate name, was shooting up, but they couldn't show him shooting up. The original cover showed him literally injecting into his arm. And so the cover that did get published was this weird cover where he's like, arm is there, and there's no needle, but there's stuff on the table next to him. And so luckily today there is a organization, nonprofit organization known as the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and I'm wearing one of their t-shirts. And it was a decision for me today, as I was saying before the talk, about what I was going to wear. And I ordered a I Like Banned Books t-shirt, which my post office sent back. So I couldn't wear that, but I thought I like this one. It's by an artist named Chester Brown. And there's that. So who am I and why am I here? That's what my office used to look like. We moved to Kalama. My office no longer looks like that, but I do still read Mad Magazine. What does it say down there? All right, obligatory transition slide. So I'm a reader of stuff, as I mentioned. I read lots of stuff. Basically, if it's in print, I'm going to attempt to read it at some point. I've even read romance novels, going back to one of the talks last quarter, and attempted to write, well, not attempted, I wrote a romance novel, a teen romance novel. In 6 weeks, I made a bet with my sister, who was really into teen romance novels in the late 80s. I said, I can write one in 6 weeks. I almost got it published. And then it was kind of at the tail end of the Harlequin Silhouette teen romance excitement at that time period. There we go. I'm also a writer of stuff. I've worked in journalism, I've written reference book entries, and I aspire to get novels published. I've had some short stories and poems published even here at LCC and our Solal Review. I've even written instructional software, like on resumes and cover letters, and various things way back when discs were like this big and you got a whole package of instructional software. It was kind of funky. I also do a daily blog. So in 2013, when I found out I had cancer, I came up with this idea to do this blog to see if I could wear a different t-shirt every single day for a year, to see if I had 365 t-shirts. And actually, I thought of it before I learned I had cancer and thought, nobody's going to want to read that. That's narcissistic. And the internet is full of narcissism. I'm not going to contribute to more narcissism. Then I found out I had prostate cancer. I no longer have prostate cancer. I'm clean and had my prostate out. But at that point, I didn't care if it was narcissistic. I was going to do the damn blog. And I did it every day for a year and had, of course, more than 365 t-shirts because I kept buying them because, I wanted to feature certain content. And then after my mother passed away, I started up daily blogging again at Sense of Doubt and did a whole series for about 3 years called Hey Mom, where I just continued conversations with my mother, which eventually became just talking about whatever I wanted to talk about, which is what it is today. And a lot of the resources for this talk I've put on my blog, and I have a lot on censorship. So last year I did a whole series on censorship, started with, I'm a big David Bowie fan, so I started with an homage to his Orwellian musical, the album Diamond Dogs, which was meant to be a full musical adaptation of 1984. And so he has a song called Big Brother. And then did different things that were in the news. Things happening in school boards, of course, Fahrenheit 451, and book bans and book burning. The teacher snitch line that you could, if you learned of teachers teaching things that were inappropriate in the classroom, you could call a tip line and snitch on them. That just makes me so happy to learn about. And then, of course, the book Genderqueer, which I had not read yet. It was on my radar. And I'll be talking about it a little bit. But I bought a copy of it when I learned that it was going to be banned. I brought the original version. I have pictures later of the deluxe version that Maya Kobabe, the author, has published since then. It's basically the most banned book in America over the last 2 years. And most of the people that want it banned have not read it. So one of the books that recently was the target of banning was the Girls Who Code books. When the author found out that his books were being banned, he was so angry he could barely breathe. Fortunately, the ban was rescinded, but it was stupid from start to finish. Just because of the hysteria of book banning, when given a whole list of educational resources that teachers and students might use in a local community, things that might help explain why George Floyd was murdered. A very conservative and very white school board did not like that one bit, and banned all the books and resources, every single one, which included the Girls Who Code for no apparent reason, until parents and teachers got really angry, and students, because students really stand up for this. And they were unbanned, which is something that happens frequently, which I'll talk about. And then in other news, and of course, if you want to check out all these resources, again, my bit.ly, and they're pretty much all linked in the presentation. or in the notes. And then, but you're gonna open up a folder full of tons of files, because I also am giving you all the images just in case you want them. But a school in, I believe, Florida, as Florida is really the hotspot of this right now, tried to ban the coexist flag. And a teacher was on the hot seat for his job for having the coexist flag in his classroom. Which, you know, I just don't understand why that's a bad message, but that's part of this whole talk I'll keep talking about. So books are great. You're probably of the same mind as I am if you're here at this talk, because you love books. It's one of the most important things in my life. I'm so thankful I can still read books. And all kinds of literature, including comic books, because obviously I'm a big comic book nerd. And so reading is also sexy. So you could Google "reading is sexy," and you'll find all sorts of really cool memes and images, and this is one of them. But books are unique and portable magic. They transport you to places and different time periods and other worlds, and open up to, you know, amazing experiences, and you learn so many things from books. And to take those away, it just doesn't make any sense. So Toni Morrison, one of our greatest authors in the modern era, or ever, really, was really outspoken against censorship, because she's often the target of censorship, all of her books. And she would ask, because of censorship, what would happen if this book was not written? And how she and other authors feel swallowed by fear for putting things out there into the universe that might get censored. And this is a really long quote. I'm not going to read you all the quotes, but it makes you wonder, what was in the library at Alexandria that was one of the 7 wonders of the world and was burned and is gone, right? What could have been written? Uh-oh, it's back. What could have been written that hasn't been written because of fear of censorship, or had been written and all copies are expunged from the universe, right? And Morrison's books are frequently the target of censorship, pretty much all of them. But The Bluest Eye, her very first novel, is at the top of your bookmark, and is almost always at the top of the list in the last 20 years or so, because of its depictions of child sexual abuse and incest. And I just finished reading it because I never read it. And it's beautiful, because all of her books are beautiful. She's an amazing poetic, lyrical author. And that's why she won a Pulitzer for Beloved, which is also one of the most targeted books in her canon, and a Nobel Prize in Literature. She is the first Black American woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, which, you know, is conveyed by the Nobel Prize organization out of Sweden. Is it Sweden or Norway? I'm having sudden doubt. I wanted to say Sweden. It is Sweden. The Jeopardy expert tells me Sweden. So you know it's Sweden. Current Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, that CNN recently, for a reason I fail to understand, did a whole town hall with, basically ran on the platform of banning Beloved, which was an Oprah book club pick. Morrison got the idea from a newspaper clipping. It's a Civil War era book about the return of a person as a ghost. I don't really want to tell you too much, because it's one of the most amazing books I've ever read in my whole life, and I strongly recommend it. But you know, Glenn Youngkin basically is governor now, in large part because of that campaign. So you know, if you troll the internet, there's example upon example upon example of banned books, lists and lists of banned books. There's weird ones here, and of course you probably can't read all of this, but I put it on here just so that I could mention a couple, like How to Eat Fried Worms, number 13. Little Red Riding Hood, number 23. Maurice Sendak, number 39. Madeleine L'Engle, number 12. Doesn't make any sense. and other lists. Books are often censored for racial issues. That's one of the most common. Encouragement of damaging lifestyle, gay stuff. They mean gay stuff. Blasphemous dialogue, especially the name of the Christian Lord in vain. Sexual situations in dialogue. Violence or negativity, which go together somehow. I don't know. I mean, violence is negative, but negativity isn't violence necessarily. Presence of witchcraft. Religious affiliations for unpopular religions. Political bias and age-appropriate material. Many books have been banned in one or more of these categories due to misjudgment or misunderstanding. Please remember previous comment, most people that want book bans haven't read the books they're trying to ban. And often the books that get banned get unbanned later. And so here's some of the more recent banned books. This is an image from the New York Times from last year, from about this time of the year in April. And all the books that are the hottest to ban nowadays are either about or by people of color, about or by LGBTQ community people, or other groups that are not favored by the people that are banning the books. But they try to find other reasons to ban the book. They're not going to come out and say, we're banning genderqueer. Well, actually, they do with genderqueer. But they're not going to say we're banning Sherman Alexi's book because we don't want our kids reading about Native Americans. They're going to come up with some other reason to ban that book. And likewise with Toni Morrison's books, right? So this is just a transition slide because we have to have those. So graphic novels. I'm a big fan of graphic novels. Genderqueer is a graphic novel. I have taught graphic novels here at LCC. Graphic novels are nowadays often created to be novels. Originally, it was individual comic books that came out monthly that were collected into a book. You know, and it took a long time for comic book creators to think of their stories as novels. But around the late 80s, with books like Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns, some comic book creators really started to think about their books as novels. Cerebus, also by an independent publisher named Dave Sim out of Canada, published a 300 issue, a multi-volume. There's got to be like 16 or 17 of these volumes over a period of 20 years about an aardvark named Cerebus. So where was I going to go? My next slide? No. All right. So I was shocked to find out, I'm going to talk about Mouse and Persepolis. I was shocked to find out that Bone was banned. Bone is a Disney-esque, but it's not Disney, cartoon related type story about these little characters whose last names are all Bone. And they are in this interesting fantasy world where there's these rat creatures and they have adventures. And it's one of those things that adults like and kids can like as well. But some people challenged it on the grounds that it promotes drinking and smoking in one small part of one story. And that the Great Cow Race, where there's this race with cows, was politically, racially, or socially offensive. There's other books that I must have pictures of later because I don't know why they're not coming up. My notes are out of order suddenly. What is happening? Okay, time to wing it. So genderqueer came out, was on my radar because pretty much all graphic novels are on my radar. They make the list, but I can't buy them all immediately because that's expensive. So I was aware that this book existed, but hadn't bought it yet until I found out that it was being banned. And then, of course, I wanted to buy it immediately and read it, and I did, just like many, many other people, because when books are banned, sales go up. In fact, an local author who gave a talk last quarter and who wanted to be here today, Alan Rose, is like, please, please have my book banned. He very much would like for his book to be banned. So if any of you want to go banning books, just ban his so that his sales will go up, and let's make a national spectacle, make the news. Genderqueer is a memoir story of Maya Kobabe, who is different than anyone else in the LGBT community that I know of. So that's an important disclaimer. Maya has gender confusion about what gender Maya is. And she, I'm gonna be careful with my pronouns here. And Maya doesn't want, Maya wants other people to be confused as well. And so the book is about a quest for trying to figure out Maya's exploration of gender. And I'm careful to not use pronouns because Maya isn't sure what pronouns to use. She was assigned female at birth, but doesn't feel female. In fact, and so one of the reasons the book is banned is for pretty explicit scenes in which Maya visits the gynecologist, and how awful of an experience that was for her, painful and traumatic. Maya also discovers something called Spivak pronouns later in the story, and they've been around since the 1920s. I never heard of them. And this is why I love books, because you learn stuff. But Spivak pronouns are e, er, and I'm. So Maya's actual pronouns, I would refer to e, and er's book. And I struggle with that because, sometimes shifting pronouns is difficult. The book is beautiful. And Maya's story in which at the end of the book, teaching a class on comics to some junior high kids and afraid to come out and let them know about Air's gender quest is so touching. The fear of self-disclosure, which now, of course, everybody knows it's in a book, but at the time, and thinking how helpful this book would be when Maya, her Air's self, I'm screwing it up, was young, right? And the book made me cry at least twice while I was reading it. And I've read it 3 times now. And so I wrote Maya on Instagram thinking there's no way that direct messages are turned on, but they were. And I was like, don't listen to the haters. Your book is beautiful. And come to find out, almost all of the messages that Maya has received are messages of love, not so much hate. That's just out there in all the people trying to ban the book, right? Persepolis is a book I've taught here at LCC a couple of different times. It's the story of Marjane Satrapi's upbringing in Iran during the Islamic Revolution, starting about 1980. Then she goes to study in Europe, and she tries drugs. The book has been banned for language, scenes of torture, and the promoting of drug use. But could it possibly be because it's about Muslims and a young Islamic girl who is struggling with whether or not to be Islamic? What really put me over the edge is when I found out that a school in Pennsylvania banned Maus. Maus is a graphic novel by Art Spiegelman, basically chronicling the stories of his father, who was a Jewish prisoner during the Holocaust and World War II in Poland. And there's 2 parts. It's the first part. It's all in black and white, where the Jews are characterized as mice, the Nazis are characterized as cats. And then there's a few other animal characters that are neither. They banned it on the eve of International Holocaust Day. Could be a coincidence. Don't think so. Anyway, that drove me over the edge, and I was like, okay, I have to do more with banned books, which was sort of the theme of my English 102 class last quarter, but it was a little too heavy, so I've dropped it for this quarter, but figuring out how to work it back in. They even banned The Diary of Anne Frank. And sometimes I'm not going to tell you the whole story. I'm just going to leave it so you're like, they did what? And then you can investigate. Of course, I wrote about that one as well. More graphic novels, so that my notes really were not out of order, but I'm also watching time. So I'm going to skip over these other graphic novels, but they're wonderful. Bone, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, and Sandman even by Neil Gaiman. That's now a Netflix TV program. And so many other graphic novels that have come under fire. And I haven't even read all of these yet. Like, I've heard great things about New Kid, and I haven't. But Watchmen is one that, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, was kind of the beginning of graphic novels. And it's probably the graphic novel I've taught most often here at LCC. I even recently taught The Best We Could Do, which is a story of Vietnamese immigrants that have come here, written by Thi Boi, that an experience in her family, being Vietnamese in America, and the past and what their experiences were before they came here, her parents. And I think she also recounts which of her siblings were born in Vietnam and which were born here in America. Beautiful, beautiful book, won a American Book Award, and loved it. I taught it last quarter with Mouse together because they're both memoirs in a sense. And so I looked up whether it had been banned. One school, and I can't get to the article because it's behind a paywall, but in LA, thought it was inappropriate for children, and probably because it starts with Ty giving birth, and it is this harrowing scene that goes on for pages and pages of her giving birth. Lots of other banning. Agatha Christie is being rewritten right now to remove racism. And I debated whether to put this image of the original title of what became 10 Little Indians and then there were none. But it originally was that. And that book is almost impossible to get. So Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Roald Dahl books are also being rewritten to remove upsetting language, like referring to a character as fat has come under fire. And some people disagree with these decisions, but often they're made by the estates of the authors or the publishing company that owns the rights there too, such as with Dr. Seuss, that removes some books from circulation. Most importantly, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street for all kinds of upsetting imagery and storylines and material. So we must ban all the disgusting sex books. And so there is a Republican movement in North Dakota to remove any books that would be sexually explicit content, would have visual depictions of sex acts, would have sexual preferences, would have sexual perversion, would have sex-based classifications. Not sure what that is. Have material about sexual identity or gender identity, though the bill does not define those last two things at all. They exclude books that will be important for science classes and have biology, anatomy, and physiology information. They also exclude books that would be art, a weird distinction that would be difficult to make. One of the books under target was Let's Talk About It, The Teen's Guide to Sex, Relationships, and Being Human, that is harmful to minors. And a former superintendent of that school district in that state of North Dakota called it legally obscene. Now, the Supreme Court's been very clear on obscenity over 50 years ago. It's a very well-defined and very narrowly defined category of unprotected speech that excludes any work with serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Few, if any, books have been deemed obscene, and the standard for restraining a library's ability to distribute a book are even more stringent. However, if this bill passes, and it hasn't yet, it could jail librarians for up to 30 days for having these books in the library, and possibly a $1,500 fine, just based on a written request from anyone. And then back to Florida. All right, so there's a huge culture war going on in Florida, and it's spreading all over the country. But Florida is really the hotbed of this particular culture war because of their now called Stop Woke Act. And the Stop Woke Act is mainly focused on divisive concepts related to teaching kids about racism, mostly focused on Nikole Hannah-Jones's influential 1619 project that was published by the New York Times and won a Pulitzer. Because of this act, Florida has banned the AP African American Studies courses and intended to free students from indoctrination. Now imagine if Germany suddenly created a law about the teaching of the Holocaust and Nazi Germany and their past, and forbid schools from teaching about Nazism on the grounds that such teaching does in fact quite obviously cause anguish and guilt in German children, which is basically the argument here. There would be a huge uproar, at least in Germany, about that, right? So I have to ask myself when I hear these news stories, what is the opposite of woke? Because it doesn't sound to me like something I would want to be. Being awake seems to be, I mean, I do like sleeping, but being awake seems to be something that I enjoy. And being awake and aware of things, I mean, that's why I read. It's an unprecedented movement right now towards censorship, and it's all happening at the grassroots level. School boards, local, small governments, state governments. More historical banned books that have been banned frequently. And you would expect something like The Tropic of Cancer or Lady Charlie's Lover or Lolita, which have sexually explicit content, to be banned, even though they're great works of literature. But Romeo and Juliet, it leads kids into rebellion. Sure does. I rebelled against it. I really hated that play. It's a failed comedy. When they kill the clown, it's over. And then it's just simpering. Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale is frequently a banned book. It's the story of what would happen if a Christian fundamentalist organization took over the United States of America and controlled everything. In this world, women aren't allowed to read. They're not allowed to own property. And handmaids are the fertile women that are there to give birth in these weird ceremonies in which they're impregnated by the commanders under which they serve, because there's been a population crisis. Frequently banned book. And so someone made a fireproof copy of it. And there's Atwood torching the book that cannot be burned. I thought that was great. Margaret Atwood is also, if I have to pick, my favorite author. So we got a lot of censorship going on. 2021 was the year of book bans. And the ban happy public is not done in 2022. Once the statistics are tabulated, looks to be just as ban happy, if not more so. Close to 2,000 titles by 1,261 different authors. So when we look at the statistics, this is a new thing for the last 30 years, right? I mean, there's been censorship throughout our history, but it was pretty steady. There were little spikes, but there were really low years. It wasn't like it is over the last couple of years. But we, start to see the numbers grow. Where am I? Sorry, technical difficulties. Oh yeah, that's where I am. Okay. And so I kind of did a look, and this is pretty much what you saw on the graph as well. But I thought seeing all the numbers would be helpful. And you can see that they were pretty steady for a really long time. When we look at subject matter, LGBTQ themes, people of color, totally beat out sexual content. And then we get down to religious minorities, those things get banned, but it's a smaller number. Types of books, it's mostly young adult books that young adults would read. And of course, we know that lots of adults read young adult books. So that's not something that would just impact teenage readers. Where is this happening? Florida is a big hotspot. Texas is a big hotspot. Up here where we are, we have a color, but it's not one of the reddish colors. But then we're not in the 0 category either, in the Washington, Oregon sector. So one of the big groups behind book bans is Moms for Liberty. And you'll notice where most of their chapters are. Again, not to hate on Florida. I hope, any of you that go to Florida or have relatives in Florida or from Florida, I apologize. I'm not trying to say Florida is a horrible place. I'm just concerned about the things that are happening there. But they're trying to spread out these chapters nationwide. We have heard that someone is targeting the Longview Public Library. There was supposed to be a discussion of that at the Board of Trustees meeting on Monday, but it was canceled due to illness of many of the Board of Trustees individuals. No? You can ask the question in a minute. That's what I heard. So book bans are extremely unpopular. Like many decisions that prohibit our rights, like abortion and same-sex relationships, book bans are very unpopular with the public. 8 in 10 people disagree with these bans. 71% of voters oppose efforts to remove books from public libraries. And most libraries, especially school libraries, have an opt-out program. So if a parent has a concern about a book like this one, they can say, my son or daughter is not allowed to check that book out. Problem solved. There's also a target of things like drag queen bingo, which sometimes happens in libraries, as something that we must censor because of how upsetting it is. I remember years ago when I was visiting a friend of mine that lived in New York, and took her daughter to the Pride Parade that happens around Halloween every year there. And she said, kids love the Pride Parade because everybody's all dressed up and it's costumes and it's fun and everybody's having fun and they totally get it. It's super great. But there's been threats of violence about stuff like this. There were credible threats of violence against multiple drag queen bingo programs. There were threats to gun down school librarians because of the materials in the library. So, yeah. Okay, so I'm also watching the time. I'm getting close to the end, so I'm going to have to speed it up here. I'm not going to go through all these slides, but you can have access to them. Hunger Games was banned. Harry Potter is frequently the target of banning. Stephen King thinks this is really bad and you should get the books that are being banned because that's what the people that are banning them don't want you to know, and that's exactly what you need to know. There's your bookmark. But why is this happening? So that was what everybody wanted to know and come here. Well, first of all, is protect the children. We must protect the children. There's actually a Protect the Children organization that I stole this image from. And protect the children, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But nowadays, protect the children has taken on new meaning. It's not just keeping them innocent of sexually explicit materials that they're not ready for. I certainly wasn't ready for them at age 7, for example. But it's about keeping them free of indoctrination and keeping them free of grooming, which are 2 subjects I want to come back to. So I think there's several reasons why this is happening. One is backlash. Susan Faludi published a book in 1990 about the backlash to the women's movement, basically trying to annihilate the single career woman in the 80s. And we must remember that women are not equal under the eyes of the law. Even yet today, there is no constitutional law that guarantees women the same rights and privileges and freedoms as people who do not identify as women. There's no equal rights amendment. But we've had other backlash that we're experiencing. There's a backlash to 8 years of the Obamas, because the country seemed to get to a point where an African-American family could, African-American president could be elected, African-American family could live in the White House and then get reelected. And then following the events of 2020, we had a pandemic. When George Floyd was murdered, there were a lot of protests that followed that, many of which were violent. There was an election in 2020 that is contested. Then there was an event on January 6, 2021, in which they erected a gallows in sight of the US Capitol. Some people erected a gallows. Banning the teaching of systemic racism is a perfect example of systemic racism. But I won't go through my critical race slides because I'm trying to speed it up here. But conservative race, the hysteria over it was basically invented by a guy that lives in Seattle. I basically subscribed to the New Yorker just to read the article about this, which has that name right there and is in my notes. Magicians use misdirection. Harry Houdini literally made an elephant disappear, an actual elephant, a live, huge, big elephant disappear from the stage using just misdirection. So I think a lot of book bans are about misdirection. An example, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, around the very same time, they struck down the law that requires police officers to read Miranda rights to people when they arrest them. Projection. If I'm doing something bad and I can't deal with it, I'm going to accuse you of doing the thing that I'm doing. And this brings us back to grooming, because it's this old tired trope that LGBTQ people, mostly gay men, groom children in which to sexually abuse them. Statistics show us that most sexual abuse is committed by family members or people that know the victims. That most of it is not perpetuated by gay men that are trying to groom children and take advantage of them. In 93% of the cases, the victims know the abuser. 82% of the suspected perpetrators of child sexual abuse in the study sample were at the time of the offense or had been at some time involved in a heterosexual relationship. It's all fear. It's all about fear. By 2045, white people in this country will be outnumbered by people of color, according to the book, How Civil Wars Start by Barbara F. Walters. I have a whole huge chunk of that book here that talks about how that's changing from Hamilton to Obama's cabinet and all of that. But for interests of time, I'm speeding along. But oh no, that's on the next slide. So I had to work this in, being a huge Bowie fan. But things are changing, people fear change, right? So we want to get back to the time where it felt safer, the people that are resisting the change by doing things like banning books, right? And media stoke this fear. There's a great book which I just finished rereading for the second time, which I used to teach long ago in Michigan at the university, called The Culture of Fear. It's been updated for the post-Trump era. And it's about how the media stoke our concepts of fear about things that are not as horrible as we think they are. Just like Fox News mentioning critical race theory over 1,300 times in a period of 3.5 months. The media at large, not just Fox News, does this about so many things. If it bleeds, it leads is a common motto, right? And so a good example is child abduction. They'll put out the story that 58,000 children are abducted by strangers every year. And the US Department of Justice made clear that in that study, of that 58,000 number, only about 115 of those abductions are what we would consider the stereotypical kidnapping that the media is putting forward. Things are getting serious. We are, as a country now, an anocracy. So an anocracy is in between a democracy and an autocracy. And there's a organization that does these ratings. It's the Polity Project by the Center for Systemic Peace. And they give it a rating between -10 and +10. And since 1800, the United States has been +10 democracy. Starting in 2016, our polity score started to drop. And by 2020, it was +5. It dropped 5 points. So from +5 to -5 is an anocracy. North Korea is a full-on autocracy. They're at -10. So I was going to say some things about MAGA. I'll skip that. So we got to fight like hell. We're not going to have a country anymore. I just felt I needed to say that. You got to stop these book bans by really embracing messages of love, which is the last thing I wanted to leave you with, which is a message that Wonder Woman gave to people way back in the 40s, in the early years of the Wonder Woman comics, that the solution to divisiveness is love. All right, pretty close. I'm now open to questions.
All right. We're running late. We're going to do a couple of questions, though.
Thank you. That was pretty good.
Thanks.
I disagreed with a few.
I knew people would disagree with some things.
Should be right. Do you think our educational system, elementary, high school, are contributing to the problems of America? I see on the news all the time, kids are graduating and they can't read. They can't read at grade level. And yet it's been going on and on and on. To me, I volunteered at the school district here and they try hard. It's not lack of effort, but what they're doing isn't providing kids with the education they need. What's your thoughts?
More money.
Money in what direction?
More money for education. All those problems are fixed by bigger schools, more money, more teachers. Teachers are stretched thin. If those kids are slipping through and they're functionally illiterate, and I've taught some of those people at the online schools I no longer teach for, that were clearly functionally illiterate, and yet we're paying 3 times, 4 times as much as you're paying here at LCC to go to a nonprofit or a for-profit school. They're just slipping through the system. It's difficult. Those teachers are stretched incredibly thin. So that's my response to that.
And that, that for a long time, apparently. Why don't the school districts change? I mean, I don't want to criticize teachers because, like you say, they are stressed. I volunteered in classes and they got a very tough job, but yet they don't seem to be making adjustments.
Until the system changes, it's not going to change. The way we fund schools is the problem. We change the system. That's why you got to fight like hell. You're not going to have a country anymore. But the system, we have all these antiquated things that were created when it made sense when the country was smaller, and they don't make sense when the country is bigger or in the modern world, right? And in the funding of schools, the way it is in the system and the way it's set up made sense in the 1900s or the early 20th century. It doesn't make sense now.
I have like a little bit of a comment because it kind of brought something up that I was about to ask a question on. I think the biggest problem is capitalism in schools because it kind of goes back to when like the 80s when it was like, oh, we have to make sure students are learning this and this and this. And then these businesses come in, we have just the right materials. So now we teach in a way that the money goes to the people that are making the materials, not necessarily the people that are teaching it. But I do have a question as a parent of elementary school ages, and like they're going to be they're going to be going up and up and up in these schools. what can I do to, like, if you have any like ideas, like what can I do to make sure that these books don't get banned in my schools that my kids are at?
Okay. Well, the follow-up to connect there, I was just giving a glib answer. It's a very complicated problem. So that's just one way to solve the problem. There's many things that would have to be done to address the education problem in our country. But one of the things that's amazing about the banning that's happening is that a lot of the people that come to the school board meetings to protest are the students. You know, and so you know, being involved in the school board, we've had a lot of people elected since 2020 to school boards. I mean, this is all Moms for Liberty started in 2021 and spread like that around the country. You know, it just takes speaking out and resisting the forces to ban the books, and trying to ensure that they stay in the library, or failing that, supplying them for your children yourself. Which we certainly can do.
We are very much out of time. I apologize. But thank you so much, Chris, for giving this presentation, and thank you all for joining us. And if you did not get a bookmark, I have some, so you can come pick up one of those.
You can come talk to me now if you have additional comments or questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.